Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Utah Valley Magazine Live. We're excited to have another awesome guest with us today, a Utah County resident, a woman, one of our awesome leaders, moms, just awesome resident here who has a great opportunity this year as she's Spencer Cox's running mate, which is so unique. We've all had just a crazy year. 2020 has been one of a kind, and hers has been next level one of a kind as she's been part of this governor's race, which as far as I can tell, there's just so much interest. So many people are talking about it. There's a lot of engagement, which is a great thing for our state. And Deidre, I'm excited to have you on. How has this been to run for lieutenant governor?
Well, thanks, Jeanette. I'm excited to be on with you. It's been wild. It's been wild. It's been a great experience in a lot of ways and challenging, but I always like a good challenge.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So what would be something that would surprise people about what it's like to run? What's it like to be inside a campaign?
Well, I mean, this year the campaign is so different than any other campaign, I've experienced. So I've done a lot of campaigns. I've done congressional campaigns. I'm myself elected to the Utah State Senate. So I've done 2 campaigns for that. But this year, not being able to really get out and engage very much with people in person is really hard. So doing like Zoom town halls is so difficult because you can't read people. You can't see what's resonating with people or not. It's just a shot in the dark, and you're just doing your best, and you have no idea if you're actually connecting, and that's made it really, really hard. That's one of the things that I love about campaigning, is being able to connect with people. So I've really missed that.
I bet. What do you wake up in the morning and think about? What are some of your first thoughts each day?
Well, so to be honest, I hardly ever sleep. So my brain kind of goes all night long on all of the different things.
We need to do some energy drinks or something. Keep you going.
So I'm always worried about, are we getting to the people? Are we getting the right people? Are we doing enough? The last thing you want is to leave a campaign and not have done everything that you can possibly do. So that's always top of my mind. That's always something that I'm concerned about. Am I doing enough? But you also have to balance that with other things in your life, because it's really easy to let that campaigning take over your life. I joke that I have 2 wardrobes when I campaign. I have a beginning of the campaign wardrobe and an end of the campaign wardrobe. Because during the campaign, I don't have time to eat. And I always lose about 20 pounds during a campaign. So by the middle of the campaign, I'm like, I look terrible, and all my clothes are falling off of me. And it all comes right back as soon as the campaign's over, and I'm not stressed out and I can actually eat again. But it's just crazy. And this year, on top of everything, I have been a full-time student at BYU. So I'm trying to finish up my history degree. And I decided to take spring term classes at BYU, which was maybe not the smartest thing in the world for me to do. And I'm also in the legislature. So we had a special session last week. It was one of the biggest special sessions in our state's history. We did 26 bills. We had hearings all for the 2 weeks beforehand. We had to redo the whole budget. It was just an incredible amount of work. And I had my final research papers and my final exams. In fact, Thursday, the day of the special session, we fit 2 days worth of legislative work into one day that day. And on top of that, I had 3 final exams that I had to take.
Oh my goodness.
So it was crazy. Last week just about killed me. But
I honestly don't know how you juggled these very major things. Not to mention you have 5 children, right?
Yes.
Right. And that's a busy role. Your youngest is 17.
My youngest will be 17 on Sunday. So the 4 oldest they're grown and out of the house. So that's great. But I did have a missionary come home in March with the mass exodus of a lot of missionaries, and now she's getting married in August. So we're going to throw a wedding on top of all of these things, which is very, very nice.
Peter, that's a crazy thing. You probably don't have time to keep a journal, but if there was ever a year to keep a journal, it is this year.
Yeah.
Save some voice memos in your phone of how you're feeling or something.
Yeah, I need to do better at that for sure. I kind of use Facebook as my journal.
No, that's good. That's a record. I love that. I first became acquainted with you, I think it was around 2012. Well, it's probably before that actually,
For
because you
that,
were
maybe
working
11
on
or 10. Yeah.
Jason Chaffetz's campaign, and I had heard there's this amazing woman running the campaign, and so we featured you in Utah Valley Magazine, and it's been fun to watch you ever since. And I know you're a big voice in the legislature, and we're so excited to have Utah County represented, of course, women represented. So thank you for all the good that you've done. It's
Thank you.
amazing. And I also have loved, as Spencer has talked about why he chose you, he wanted someone who had run campaigns because he's having a pretty big year himself.
Right. Yes.
So I know he said, he's very focused on the state's response to COVID-19, which has been no small task. And so he wanted your expertise to help with the campaign. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with Spencer and how often you're able to talk and collaborate, given all that you both have going on.
Well, Spencer and I were both elected to the Utah legislature in 2012. So he was elected to the House of Representatives the same year I was elected to the Senate. And we got to serve together one session. And then he was about 9 months into his first term. Governor Herbert asked him to join him as his lieutenant governor. And so we then have worked together in a different capacity ever since then. There were some fires, some major fires down here in South Utah County, the Pole Creek and Bald Mountain fires back in 2018. And at that time, I really got to work a lot closer with Spencer than I really had before. He was down here almost every day, helping out and helping coordinate and making sure that everybody down here had all of the resources and the things that we need. And I was heavily involved in that effort. And so we were able to really work together and get to know each other even better then. And it's been interesting. So I was actually up for re-election to my third term in the Utah State Senate this year. After the legislative session ended, the filing period opened up for people to file to run for office, and I filed to run for re-election. And the next day, Spencer and Abby asked my husband Gabe and I to come down to Fairview and meet with them. And that's when Spencer asked me to join him. And it was a kind of a tough decision because I really love serving in the state Senate. I feel like I've been able to be a good influence there and have a good voice and make some good changes. And so it was really hard because I couldn't do both things. I couldn't run for re-election to the Senate and run as Spencer's running mate. I had to pick. But I've just been I've been so impressed with the way Spencer has handled things. And not only I'm a conservative, he's a conservative. I love the principles that guide him, but even more than that, I love his character. I love his character. I love his how kind he is to people, and how genuine he is, how genuinely he cares about other people. And those are the things that really impressed me about him and made me decide, you know what, he is the right person for this job, and I'm going to go ahead and join him. And so I did, and I'm really glad that I did. But I haven't, especially those first few weeks of the campaign, I really didn't have any interaction with him. He was working probably 20 hours a day on the COVID-19 response. It was a really crazy, intense time for him. And so the campaign just kind of we had to kind of run ourselves. And it was the convention, the caucus convention process was weird this year, but we worked really, really hard, and we won convention. We won by 10 points in convention over our nearest competitor. And
I was just looking at that today, actually, because Huntsman, I mean, now Cox and Huntsman are the two front runners and neck and neck, but at that convention, that wasn't the case.
Correct. Huntsman was out in the first round. I mean, he was one of the first, when there's of the four main candidates, he was the first one out, and even some of the other candidates that didn't make it out of convention. So we were thrilled with that outcome. We worked really hard and to visit with delegates as best you can when you can't actually go visit with delegates, and make a lot of phone calls and, online town hall meetings and all of that. But he's been more engaged the last few weeks. He's been able to step away a little bit more and do more campaigning, which has been really nice. He's kind of had this week to go back, as things get, tricky at the state level. He's had to engage less in the campaign than he, I'm sure, would like to this week, but he's got to do his job, and that's always been his top priority, is doing the job he was elected to do.
Right. And one of the things when people ask me what I think of Spencer Cox, because I've been part of the campaign and I'm a big fan, is I always start with his character, like you just talked about too. He has impeccable character. And a couple of examples of that are when he was so busy with COVID and he said, don't donate to my campaign, donate to people who need it or causes that are associated with what the state's really facing. I thought that showed a lot of character. And also that you weren't running campaign ads for that time in the beginning of COVID, that you knew that wasn't the message people needed to be flooded with at that moment. So
right.
There's so many things that I admire about you and Spencer as a team, but character I think is number one there. So I love that. So you are in Spanish Fork. You've been there for over 20 years. Is that right?
Yes. 22 years now.
2 years. So I'd love to hear what you love about Spanish Fork and also Utah County in general.
Well, oh my gosh. So Spanish Fork, it's really funny because I'd never been to Spanish Fork before we moved here. I grew up in Salt Lake County and all over the country, really. We lived a lot of places when I was growing up, but I spent 6 years in Salt Lake County. And then I came back to Utah for BYU. Now, my husband was born and raised in Wilmington, North Carolina. So he came out to BYU also, and that's where we met. And then after we'd been married for a couple of years, we had a 2-month-old baby. Our oldest was 2 months old, and he got into physical therapy school in North Carolina. So we packed up our stuff and we moved out to North Carolina. And I didn't know if we'd ever be back to Utah. But it ended up after physical therapy school that my family in the meantime had moved to Mapleton. His mother had moved to Tooele, and then down to Highland. And so like our families started kind of converging in Utah County. So we came back and we were dirt poor. We had 2 babies and no pennies to rub together. And so we went to the place that had the house that we could afford, and that was Spanish Fork. And to my surprise, when we moved here, I found out that the cemetery was full of my pioneer ancestors.
Oh,
my
wow.
pioneer ancestors settled Spanish Fork, and I did not know that before I moved here. So
you were coming home. You were coming home to a home you didn't know had existed.
Exactly. So we have felt so comfortable here and so blessed. With my husband's job, he travels a lot up and down the Wasatch Front. We could live anywhere, and we have chosen. We chose when we built a new house. We chose to build it in Spanish Fork and to stay in Spanish Fork, and because we love it. We love the people. We love that it's a smaller town. It's certainly growing, but it's close to the bigger things. And there's nowhere we'd rather be than here in Spanish Fork. And Utah County in general is just a really wonderful place to be. Place I wouldn't rather live anywhere else. I love Utah County. People joke that it's a bubble. I don't know that it's a bubble, but it's sure full of great people, and we love it.
I feel the same way. Do you have favorite restaurants or places that you like to go with your family?
Well, so we actually live, there's a lot of new restaurants and stuff coming in Spanish Fork. Of course, there's always the locals and the little local places. Barry's is always a favorite. We love Barry's Drive-In. That's a Spanish Fork landmark. But we live really close to the rodeo arena, which I love. So during every year when we go to the rodeo, we can just walk there. We have to worry about parking our car. We just walk through the river trail and cross the street, and we're at the fair. We're at the fair park. We're at the rodeo arena, and I love it so much. The small town feel and the accessibility that we have to our neighbors and to the things in the city that make our city so special. We're a mile away from Main Street, and it's just great.
It is a great city. One of the magazines we produce is the Fiesta Days magazine. So of course we're rooting for everything to still happen, or at least on some level, so that we can participate in the events, but also produce the magazine that celebrates all the good things that Spanish Fork does.
And they're having the rodeo this year. I don't know about all the other things, but I know they're having the rodeo.
Rodeo will happen, so you can walk to it. Like you're saying, you're in a great location. What's something you could talk about for hours? What's one of your favorite things to talk about?
So I'm really a history nerd, and it probably drives everyone around me crazy, but I see parallels to history in everything I do and see. And that's, to me, why it's so fascinating, why history is so fascinating to me, because if we don't understand where we came from, we can't understand where we are or have the vision for where we want to go. And so to me, it's so important. And I see these parallels everywhere in government. I just got through studying the Soviet Union. I had a Soviet history class, and I see a lot of things that happened there that are maybe starting to happen now, and it's really, really good to, I think, connect some of those dots, and before they get too far. So
what's an example of a parallel that you're seeing?
Well, so just the other day, Spencer and I were actually in Heber Valley. We went to Midway and we visited a dairy farm. And they were talking about how the large conglomerates are kind of, and it's government driven, it's federal government driven, how they're kind of consolidating and making it really, really difficult for these small farmers to actually work. And it reminded me of the collectivization that happened under Stalin, with the grain, which drove up. What happened was, well, with what's happening with milk right now, is that the prices are so low, and it's government mandated. The prices are so low that farmers sometimes lose money on milk. And that's what was happening with the grain under Stalin, is that the peasants were forced to sell their grain for so little that they started to hoard it. And then there was this big famine. There was a big famine that didn't need to happen, that killed millions of people. And I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen with our milk, but I'm just looking at this and I'm seeing parallels, and I think, okay, we really need to be careful with the policies that we put in place, and what those long-term effects could be for those policies. I also, whenever we travel anywhere as a family, or if I travel for legislative things or anything, I have to visit all the state capitol buildings. This is on my bucket list, and I'm just 29 now. I got a long way to go, but last year for spring break, for example, I took my daughter, who was then 15, and I'm like, hey, let's go visit some capitol buildings for spring break. I mean, like, talk about my poor children. They're just long suffering, and they have such a nerdy mom. So she and I drove. We'd already been to Boise. So we drove through Boise. We ended up going to Washington, Oregon, California, and Nevada's capitals in 5 days. We did 4 capitol buildings in 5 days, and it was really fun. And one time we took the kids to Missouri to go to St. Louis and then down to Branson, but we had to do a 4-hour detour through Jefferson City so that I could see the Capitol building. I mean, it's just things like that my family is really really patient with me. My son and I actually decided that maybe July would be a good opportunity for me to hit some of these Capitol buildings fairly nearby that I haven't visited yet. So he actually mapped out a road trip for us that encompassed Wyoming and Colorado and North and South Dakota and Nebraska and New Mexico. I don't know if we'll get to do it.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I have no doubt you'll hit all 50 by the time your life ends many decades from now. Well, nobody can predict the future, but I do feel like understanding the past is the key to making the best decisions today and for the future. So I love that you have that history background. I think that will come in really handy as the Lieutenant Governor. And I just want to wish you and Spencer the best these next few days and next months and years as this continues to unfold. Thank you for chatting with us today.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Just remember, your ballots are due June 30th, so get those mailed back in, participate. This is the 150th anniversary of Utah being the first state where women could vote. So it's always a great time to vote, but especially this year to celebrate the way that Utah led out for women's rights. And we continue to be a great state for women, as evidenced by Deidre being such a force for good in our state. So thank you for joining us. You can find out more at coxforgovernor.com and at Utah Valley Magazine. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.